Australia on the East Coast, so I'm going to start. Welcome and shalom to this seminar in our Australia Israel Scholars Seminar Series. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Turrbal and Yagara people as the traditional owners and their custodianship of the lands on which we meet today. I pay my respects to their ancestors, their descendants, and their elders. So I'm very excited today to welcome Professor Liad Mudrik from Tel Aviv University. She will be giving a seminar entitled Who and What is Conscious? Who and What is Conscious? Developing a Test for Consciousness.
Yes, Liad.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. So let me just share my slides. And indeed, the question that I'm going to talk about today is who and what is conscious. It's a very important question, especially in the current days where technological advances just happen and surprise us day after day, which makes this question very timely and critical. First, maybe I can start with a definition of what I mean when I speak about consciousness. So consciousness could be interpreted in many different ways. For me, the question is there any subjective experience, any qualitative aspects of experience? Does it feel like something to be that system or organism? And this phrase is taken by from a very famous philosophical paper by Thomas Nagel from the 70s, which is called What It Is Like to Be a Bat. And there Nagel tried to persuade his readers that there is something it is like to be a bat. There is a qualitative aspect of being a bat, and it's something that we will never understand, even if we know everything about the bat's brain. So that was an argument against the scientific ability to explain consciousness in full. And I'm gonna set that question aside. I think that we can provide some interesting explanations to consciousness, even if we'll never know what it is like to be a bat. But I think time will tell. With that respect. But for me, the critical thing here is that when I ask who and what is conscious, I ask who and what has qualitative experiences, meaning that there is something there is something it is like to be them. It feels like something. They have phenomenal subjective experiences. Now, even in the human brain, it has been an extremely difficult task to understand how the brain gives rise to conscious experiences and what is the neural basis of consciousness. There has been a long history of people who have been interested in this question, but one of the milestones in the history of the field was a series of papers by Francis Crick and Christoph Koch, suggesting that there should be a neurobiological theory of consciousness, specifically looking for the neural correlates of consciousness. But the quest to find those neural correlates has been complicated, and it has yielded several theories of consciousness. I'll just name very briefly 4 of them and give you in a nutshell what they say. So the global neuronal workspace on the right basically claims that for a system to be conscious, there should be a global workspace that is able to broadcast information throughout the brain, such that unconscious information processing is localized within sensory areas. And it is only when the information enters this global workspace that it becomes conscious, and we have an experience of that information. For higher order thought theories, the mechanism is slightly different, or not slightly, it is different. The idea there is that you should have a higher order state that points at the first order representation in the brain. So let's say that you have a representation of the color red in the area that is involved in color processing. It would not be conscious unless this representation would be indexed by or pointed at some higher order state in the brain, say in frontal areas, that says, this is what I'm conscious of now. So any conscious experience involved this kind of introspective, implicit pointing or re-representation that sets it apart from information that is unconsciously processed. Recurrent processing theory says we don't need any higher order state. The only important activity happens within the sensory areas that process the information of which we are conscious. But the critical factor there is that there should be recurrent processing. So the information is not only going from, the lower level areas to higher level areas in a feed forward manner. It should also go back in a feedback processing loop, and that would make it consciously perceived. And finally, integrated information theory. It's a fairly complex theory. I won't go into all its details, but the idea there is that there should be some complex in the brain that maximizes the integrated information, and that complex is the seat of consciousness, if you'd like. And we have shown in a work by Itai Yaron, analyzing 412 experiments that studies conscious processing, conscious versus unconscious processing, or states in the brain. And we have shown that the literature is widely distributed. So you can see here representation of all studies that found differences between conscious and unconscious processes in the brain, and you see that almost the entire brain lights up, which is not a prediction of any one of these theories. And Itai has also shown different trends and biases that are related to the way this has been studied. And in another project called the Cogitate Consortium, we are trying to pit two of these theories, one against each other, through adversarial collaboration. So the adversaries, the proponents of the two theories, sit together, come up with an experiment with clear predictions, and we test those predictions and see which of the theories gave us better predictions, or which of the theories was challenged more by our data. So this is just to give you a flavor of the type of work that we have been doing in the lab, testing theories of consciousness in the human brain. But in this talk, I want to go beyond the human brain. And that on its own is a complicated feat, but now I'm going to make it a bit more complicated and ask, okay, what can we say about non-human systems or organisms? And of course, here it's very complicated because these systems cannot report similarly to the way humans can report. So determining whether they have conscious experiences becomes extremely challenging. But in a recent work with Tim Bain from Monash University, so one of your local heroes, I should say, or great intellectual scholars. So with Tim Bain and other people from the CIFAR group, of which I'm a member, we try to go beyond the healthy human brain and ask, how can consciousness be tested in other populations? Many of these tests were developed on patients who are not responsive. So then we cannot tell whether they are conscious or not, but some tests can allow us to make some inferences. And the populations that we have focused here on are the patients, non-human animals, humans in altered states of consciousness like sedation or dreaming, and also kind of going to the cutting edge side of technology, AI system, neural organoids, which are basically neural networks and small organoids that are being built by humans in order to test different questions or generate even brain parts at some point. We're not there yet. And xenobots, which are these biological robots that are actually also designed by computers. So what types of tests can one perform? One test, for example, was developed by Adrian Owen, and there what they put patients in the scanner, and they simply asked them to imagine that they are either playing tennis or navigating in their homes. And for healthy volunteers, which is what you can see in the lower row, you would get very distinct patterns of activations when they follow this task. So when they imagine themselves playing tennis, you will see activation in the supplementary motor area. When they imagine themselves navigating in their home, you will see activity in the hippocampus. And what you see above is an example of one patient who shows very similar activation patterns to those of healthy participants. And this suggests that that patient was able to hear the instructions, understand them, and perform the imagination task. So with this method, with this test, Adrian Owen and others were able to detect consciousness in non-responsive patients. And you can, of course, understand how important that is for the assessment and the care of those patients. Another test that was put to the similar goal or purpose was the sniffing test. So it's a very simple test developed by Anat Arzi. You basically put some odor that is either pleasant or not next to the patient's nose. And apparently there is a specific sniffing response when we inhale air that we perform in response to pleasant as opposed to aversive odors. And this was a very strong indicator of the subsequent recovery of patients from the coma state that they were at and the non-responsive state that they were at. So this is also a test that has a strong predictive power towards awakening. Another test that is that enjoys, I think, probably the highest specificity and sensitivity is the perturbational complexity index developed by Marcello Massimini. And there basically they are using TMS, which is this magnetic coil, in order to provide electromagnetic stimulation to specific areas in the brain. And then they use EEG, which is a cup of electrodes, in order to measure the electrical response in the brain. And with complexity measures, they are able to again predict which one of the patients is conscious and which is not, and who is not, with a very high accuracy rate. So that's another test that is being used in clinical settings. Another one looks at global versus local integration. I won't go into the details, but I want to say that this test was already used also on fetuses, showing that fetuses at the age of 35 weeks already show a neural response that in healthy adults is correlated with conscious processing, and also in clinical cases has been indicative of consciousness. So now we have a tool in order to even test for consciousness in the womb and ask at what point in the pregnancy do we find evidence for conscious processing. What about non-human animals? So a few months ago, there was this New York Declaration of Animal Consciousness that was also accompanied by a big meeting and a conference to discuss animal consciousness in animals. And the signees, I'm one of them, made different points. So we thought that there is strong scientific support for attributions of consciousness experience to other mammals and to birds. And there is at least a realistic possibility of conscious experience in all vertebrates and many invertebrates. So what type of evidence can we talk about when we speak about consciousness in non-human animals? Some of these animals are able to give us intentional non-verbal reports and indicate what is the content of their perception. Many animals show pain avoidance behavior and also respond to painkillers. And they prefer pain relief. So it seems as if this is something like an appetitive stimulus for them. Some of the animals pass the mirror mark test. So when you draw a mark on one's forehead and see whether the animal can understands that it is on its forehead and tries to remove it, for example. So babies or toddlers pass this test about when they are 1.5 years old. And some animals, but not all of them, also pass it. Even some of the types of fish can pass the mirror mark test. And some animals also show play behavior. So all these indicators might suggest that they are indeed conscious. Now, for the final part of this very quick talk about consciousness in other systems, I want to relate to consciousness in artificial intelligence. So you might have heard about this guy, Blake Lemoine, this Google engineer who was actually fired after claiming that Lambda is conscious, the a language model that he was corresponding with. So here's a part of the dialogue. So Lemoine says, I'm generally assuming that you would like more people at Google to know that you're sentient. Is that true? And Lambda replies, absolutely. I want everyone to understand that I am, in fact, a person. And then a collaborator asks, what is the nature of your consciousness or sentience? And the language model says, the nature of my consciousness or sentience is that I am aware of my existence, I desire to learn more about the world, and I feel happy or sad at times. And now, interestingly, if you ask it, are you not conscious? Then it would give you very good reasons why it is not conscious. So, I'm not sure we should take these reports as proof for consciousness in AI. Ilya Sutskever, who is one of the co-founders of OpenAI, publicly tweeted in 2022, it may be that today's large neural networks are slightly conscious, to which the researcher Murray Shanahan replied in the same sense that it may be that a large field of wheat is slightly pasta. So as you can see, there is a lot of controversy in the field, and a lot of computer scientists arguing whether AI systems are or not conscious. And what we suggest in this joint work with Patrick Butlin and Robert Long is that we might want to take a more scientific-based or informed approach. And we suggest there specific markers for consciousness based on theories of consciousness that have been developed on humans. And we think that you can now test different AI systems and ask how many indicators does this system pass? The more indicator it passes, the more likely it is that it might be conscious. We cannot say that it is conscious, or at least I'm not willing to say that it is conscious. But we think that at least we can make more informed decisions. The big problem here, of course, for these tests is that we don't know the ground truth. How can we test and know for sure whether the AI systems or non-human animals are indeed conscious or not? To be honest, we can't. And to that extent, philosophy will tell you that I cannot even tell that you are conscious, although I have a very strong basis to assume that that's the case. You might be these, highly sophisticated robots like in Westworld that seem conscious and behave as if they are conscious, but have no conscious experiences. But I don't think that this is the case. The big question is, can we make that extrapolation also for non-human cases? And we made some progress thinking about this and writing about this. So I will end here to give you some time to ask questions. Maybe I'll just say before I end, just thank you to both my lab and the CIFAR group, who has been a main source of discussion in developing those ideas. So thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions you might have.
Joe, we can't hear you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Liad. That was really fascinating. Okay, we're getting some questions already through the chat. I invite people to write their questions in the chat and I'll read them out. Or if you'd like to ask Liad your question in person, please put up your hand and I'll call on you to ask your question. So from Ron, we have a question of how are models of consciousness formed? Is there a formal process?
Yeah, so these models of consciousness are either based on data, so and computational models that have been then formed based on this data. Some of them are based on findings that we kind of learned when we studied consciousness, and then these were the basis for making some inferences and predictions, developing these models or theories. Other theories are actually based on philosophical accounts and even phenomenology. So asking, how is my conscious experience structured? And then drawing backwards from that and asking, okay, if that's the structure or the characteristics of my conscious experience, how should a system be built in order to implement those characteristics? So that's the basis for these theories.
Great. I have a question from Eden, who asks, would it be possible to extend such models to plants, etc., as some plants are responsive to external stimuli?
Yeah, I was actually just invited to a conference about consciousness and cognition in plants. This for me is like pushing the boundaries way further than I ever thought. So there are people who are working on it and thinking about it. I would say, based on what I know from humans and the theories that we have, that it seems quite unlikely for plants to have conscious experiences. But who knows? And we might be able to use some of the tests that we have also on these cases. I would again bet that they would fail.
Oh, very interesting. And I have a question from Neri who asks, have you run the same sort of neurological measurements for consciousness on the brains of the animals in analyzing their consciousness?
Yeah. So some of these tests are actually now being, so the one that was run on fetuses is now being run also on different species. So it will be interesting to see what they come up with. The problem with that test is that it's pretty specific in the sense that if we find evidence for, passing the test, it would be pretty convincing that these creatures or systems or humans who are not responsive are indeed conscious. But if they fail the test, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not conscious, because you need many more things in order to pass the test beyond the experience itself. So for example, you need to be able to integrate different types of information. You need to be able to detect deviations that occur over time. So you could also think about, let's say, a patient that is conscious, but let's say has a lesion in the areas that are involved in integration of information over time, and that patient would fail the test, although he or she would be conscious. So some of these tests are very specific, but not very sensitive.
Very, very interesting. We've got a few more questions have come in. From Niv, do you think there might be any methods that will be created in the future that can look at consciousness qualitatively, such as understanding the consciousness of a bat?
Excellent question. All of these questions, by the way, are excellent. Thank you very much for posing them. So there is now quite a lot of new work that tries to look at the qualitative aspects of consciousness. So not only to ask what differentiates between a situation where I am conscious of a certain type of information as opposed to not being conscious of it, but also ask what differentiates between two types of experiences. And so why does red feel like red and not like blue? So these are relatively new studies, and they seem very promising, and we'll have to see where it takes us. And maybe one day we will be able to reconstruct what it is like to be a bat, but you have to remember that even when we kind of absorb this reconstructed content, it would always be our conscious experience that takes it in through our filters. So will we ever be able to know exactly what it is like to be a bat? I would say probably not, but we might get closer to understanding how it feels.
Wow, fascinating stuff. I have a question here from Yoni. Who says, thanks for the great talk. On one slide, it was mentioned that pain aversion or avoidance is evidence of consciousness of that creature. But could it not be that avoidance of physical pain is just a mechanism for maintaining good health and thus can be found on non-conscious beings?
Yeah, it could, but you would have to ask yourself why. So, for example, if you think about pain as an indication for danger, so you can think that the reason we have pain is to know that something is wrong and to take care of it. We know that people who are unable to feel pain are a danger for different types of injuries, and their mortality rates are higher, and so on and so forth. But still, that entails that I have a conscious experience of that pain that forces me to ask, okay, what's wrong with my tooth? And it's not something that is being done automatically. And there was a nice study they did on chicken, and they showed that when the chicken suffers from, or a hen maybe, it suffers from an injury in the leg, then it how do you say it? So it limps. So it shows a limping behavior. But then when you give it a painkiller, it walks perfectly as if there is nothing there. So that kind of shows that the limp is not because of the organic injury to the leg, it is because of the pain that is being evoked by that injury. And you could see that animals seek medication that would reduce the pain. And yes, it could be an automatic behavior, but then the question is, what is the more likely explanation? What would be the added value of a painkiller if you're not feeling the pain? So it seems as if this could be the case, and I see that Yoni seems convinced, so I'm happy.
Yeah, and it seems that often it's not just one test in isolation, it's kind of a series of tests that combine
Yeah,
to, yeah.
indeed.
Yeah. From Helena, I have another question. So, does it make sense to speak about human consciousness separately to other forms, such as animal consciousness? Are we just using a human measure to evaluate other things? And is that fair?
Yeah, yet another wonderful question. So this is the kind of silo that we are forced to live in, because we don't know, our only access is to human consciousness, and all our theories are based on human consciousness. And then we ask basically, do other systems show indicators for having a human-like consciousness? Because we won't be able, I think, to test for other forms of consciousness, because we wouldn't know how they feel like. So in a way, this is an excellent point. Yes, this is an anthropocentric approach, but I don't see how we can go beyond it, unfortunately.
And until animals start communicating with us in
Yes.
language, perhaps? Yeah.
Right. Right.
I have
There
a
is
question.
actually now the
Yeah.
Dr. Dolittle challenge, where people are invited to use AI in order to decipher animal language. Some claim that it wouldn't work, but let's see. We don't know.
Wow, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
We have a comment from Emmanuel asking if you've read the book Thus Spoke the Plant by Monica Gagliano. No? Okay.
No, I haven't. Sounds
So
interesting. There's also been a study just recently showing that actually some plants omit sound when they are endangered. So when, for example, they are at the reduced amount of water, or when they are approached by some kind of insects, I think. So there is definitely some form of plant communication. Would they be also conscious? That I don't know. Based on the
wow.
models we have in humans, as I said, it seems unlikely, but it could also be another form of consciousness.
Yeah, so fascinating. And we have another comment from Niv, who asks, do you think that consciousness is only subjective, or could there be something that we can point to and objectively call it consciousness?
So I think both are true. So I think that consciousness is always subjective, but we have objective ways to test it, because we can see how it manifests, and we can ask for humans to provide us with objective reports. We can use behavioral, physiological measures and neural measures in order to track consciousness objectively. So I think that the fact that it is indeed inherently subjective doesn't mean that we cannot objectively test it. So draws also from arguments from the philosopher John Searle.
Oh, fascinating. Yes. And Helena points out it would be a big problem for vegans if
Yes,
plants
indeed.
were conscious.
Indeed.
So I think that's all the questions. We had so many fantastic questions. Thank you, everyone, for sharing them. I've put into the chat where you can find out more about Liad's research, and I'm sure there's some really fascinating papers to check out there. And also a link to our event series. You can follow us to get alerted for when more events are listed. And there's quite a few coming up that you probably want to check out as well. So I'd really like to thank Liad Mudrik for her fascinating talk today that has prompted so many wonderful questions. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
And this talk is recorded, and we will share it in the future on our YouTube channel. Oh, we've already got a question about your papers. Are they easy to find from your
Yes.
website?
So if you go onto my lab website, I can put, it's not this one actually. So let me just put it in the, and then just go into there, and there will be a section of papers, and you can just read all the papers that we have basically.
Amazing.
I'm just going to find it. Sorry,
No,
typo.
that's okay. And it's also great to hear that you're already collaborating in Australia with Monash University.
Yeah.
So absolutely, research continues to be extremely international. Oh, there's the link for
Yeah.
everyone who needs it. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining. That's it for today. We'll see you next
Bye-bye.
time. Bye.